was talking about in my presentation, as you can see, it's, in this case, market insights. It's about data from search, not just search metrics, right? Obviously, as you know, my name is Shyam, as you mentioned, and one of the things that I do here at Searchmetrics is we'll run kind of the UK and Nordic side of the operation. And essentially, as people that will know us already, we're a search data content platform for SEO and market research. We have our suite, we have our digital strategies group, and also insights. One of the things I want to talk about here today is obviously some amazing stuff that SEOs in general can do when talking to clients and when thinking about things that isn't just SEO. Right. I think in terms of SEO, it's everyone's always thinking about SEO. And we do these things with lots and lots and lots of different clients and lots of different people across the world. And I think when I get started, I wanted to have everyone focus on the fact that one of the things we're talking about is once upon a time, you know, the high street looked like this. It was a busy, bustling place. We'd go meet friends. And if you're like me, shop for things you need. And if you're like my wife, shop for things that are inspirational, window shopping, as she calls it. Although window shopping, in my case, tends to lead to real buying sooner rather than later. However, when we look at things, the new high street, in my opinion, has become a really digital one, right? And it's an online high street now, you know, as opposed to one of these ones that we can see here, right? And behind these high street are actually leaders of organizations and brands and things where actually leaders need to make truly now informed decisions about their market, where they place themselves in it, where they are, how they get going, how they get moving, and how they start growing, right? If we look at the UK, oh, my slides are going crazy. If we look at the UK in general, one of the things that you will see with some of these brands is none of these brands actually exist anymore on the high street in the same way that they used to. So I know some of you will not see these brands, but some of these brands are actually ones that don't really exist anymore on the high street. And the reason is because obviously they didn't make a good enough move or a big enough transition to looking online and understanding people in the online world. Now, when we start to look at these, actually, we can start to see that the new high street, however, is a largely digital one. And actually, if we were to give the high street an example of how things look, then this would be what it kind of looks like right now, right? I mean, if we're looking here, you know, every day Google's processing over 3.5 billion searches, and this is what the new high street looks like, right? 65% of all e-commerce searches start online. So nowadays, when you're looking at it, it's all about figuring out how we are placed within this high street. And like I say, in this session, what I want people to hopefully understand and what I want to look at is how we as SEOs have access to so much information that we maybe don't use in exactly the right way, right? And when we start to look at it, if we go here, we can start to see that this is what page 2 would look like, right? If we look at it, this is what perhaps page 5 would look like. And this is what perhaps page 10 would look like. Right? Everything that we're seeing on the internet, if we were trying to place it on the high street and how we'd look at it, it starts to look a little bit different, right? It's not exactly the same way. And within this ecosystem, just like the offline high street, there's different types of customers with different intentions and behaviors. And if we analyze this data, we can start to create a real picture on how to move forward. So like I say, we as SEOs have, you know, ability to access so much information that isn't just about ranking on page 1 or moving up the rankings, but actually more things that we can probably tap into. If we look here, there's different customers that are probably looking to compare. There's different people that are browsing. There's different people that are just looking at different products and not really wanting anything. And this is, like I say, what it looked like on the high street. But we have the same thing as SEOs in digital, right? We always have different types of customers and different parts of their buyer journey or in different funnels. So when we actually start to look into this, what we can start to see is actually, if we look at the fate of, say, the 100 largest companies on the New York Stock Exchange about, say, 30 years ago, right? Among those that didn't really, you know, well, in fact, among those that enjoyed really good shareholder returns, but didn't really post any growth, almost 50% of those were either acquired or delisted around 20 years later, right? Because growing a business is a matter of do or die. So as I said, you know, 50% of those gone, right? And that's massive. And the thing what we find is that companies that have a really high organic growth, actually, they also return a better stock price. And I think everyone knows this, which is why we as SEOs are trying to always drive more traffic and return more growth and actually grow. But actually, when we start to look at this, growth in this case is starting to get a bit tougher, right? We've got rising consumer expectations. We've got increasing competition. We've got digital disruption happening. in all these different industries. So actually growing isn't the same as it used to be in the past, right? It's not as easy as it used to be. I know SEO for me, I've been in SEO now for about 10 years. And I know, back in the day, it used to be quite an easy process to start ranking and start moving. However, now it's definitely a lot different, right? And these are the things that we really need to understand. Now, when we look at a report, we had a report in this case from McKinsey, and I was reading, this information, and they were saying there's no point optimizing your growth engine until you're clear about the opportunity that you're going after, right? And what they say is that this means investing in sound analysis to identify where the growth is today, where it's going to be tomorrow, and whether that's in your sector or a one near you. So really, the data that you're understanding needs to be good. And again, I would definitely come back and show everyone as we go through this position how SEOs, I believe, are key within any business to actually help transfer this information. And I think one of the first things that people would ask is, okay, that's great. Where does this growth actually come from? Right? Where are we going to actually move to be thinking about this growth? And actually, what McKinsey in this case suggested in their report was that in order to figure this all out, we need to properly scan for the opportunities. We need to understand how your industry and category is actually structured, right? We need to know how it's set up. So in any department that you're working in any industry, in any product that you're working in, how is it actually categorized? What are the different subsections in it? How is it structured? And in order to do that, you also need to understand kind of how many customers are in it, right? How many customers are in it? How big is the market? What are their intentions? And what does the buyer journey look like? Also, even identifying what parts of your business are more profitable, right? You need to also start looking at what trends are emerging, right? So if you know what trends are emerging in this case, then you can figure out how, say, your portfolio stacks up. We were looking at one example where actually a consumer goods company, analyzed all of their critical factors. They looked at their market size, they looked at their proportion of non-loyal shoppers, they looked at the ability to convert their customers. And actually what they found when they looked into all of the information, rather than just doing what they were doing every day, they identified untapped value of about 100 million. And based on this, they then created pipeline and strategy to tackle these segments that they weren't yet looking at in detail before. Right. So when we're starting to do all of this, if we start to figure out how our portfolio stacks up against this, we can start to identify exactly what we want to do. Now, one of the ways in which they suggest to do this is to get granular with customer segmentation. Right. It says on large companies, executives should look at markets in a different way and start understanding trends, future growth rates, market structures. They should look at industries, sub-industries, and segments, and even things that they're already doing to figure out where they can start to improve. Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this, right, is to show that actually this is really, really important. But SEOs, like I say, will start to understand very, very quickly how they can actually influence these things. And rather than just being website fixers, as we're often called, or people that are trying to get to position one, actually start using the insight that we have access to help the business make real decisions. So let's look at this and let's look at the data, right? In 2019, Alpha UX did a study on decision making, right? And what they effectively found out was that the question they asked 300 managers, 38 questions regarding their decision-making process, right? And what they did was they asked them, how important or not important is it to you to use data to make decisions, right? And as we look at it, what we can see is that, 0%, it's not at all important. Obviously, no one wanted to tell people that they don't use any data to make any decisions. I think no one wanted to admit that. But essentially, as you start to go up slowly up the list, you can see that it's 0, 2%, 7%, 33, and then 58. So when we start to look at this, we can see that this little section here are the amount of people that said it's really important to look at data. So 91% think that data-driven decision-making is really, really, really important. Right. Then they followed up, and this is Alpha HQ again, not us. They followed up with how frequently or infrequently do you now use data to make decisions? And I remember 91% said they think data is really important. And they mark this rarely, sometimes, and almost always. And as you can slowly start to see, when you start to look at how many people actually use data to make decisions, you can now see that 58% actually practice it. So let's look at that. 91 said it's important. 91% said it's important, but only 58% of people actually practice it. The question always that comes to mind is why? Why? Why is it the case that people aren't using the data in the right way? Why aren't they practicing it? Right. And I think obviously if you're thinking about this, maybe this is something you can take back to your business to figure out, do we use data? Do we practice it? Is it something that we are leveraging, or do we just use our gut, or do we just use what we think we know? Right. And I think this company actually tried to figure that out. They tried to ask, what are the most significant challenges that they face when trying to make some good decisions? Okay. And when we look at the answers to these questions, these are some of the answers that they gave, right? 37% said a lack of autonomy. Okay. They're not able to make the decisions. They can't do this themselves, right? 38% said we do things the way we do them, so we're not going to go there. 43% said there's too much deliberations. Now, when we actually go into looking at the next bit, actually, when we're looking at it, these are the things that maybe we can't control, right? As SEOs, there's not a lot of stuff here that we can actually go in and fix. That being said, the other side of this, 47% saying a lack of quality data. That's stuff that SEOs, with the data they have access to, can actually help. Right now, if we paint this picture, if there's that large of a percentage of people that are lacking quality data and you all have access to it, when there's 65% of all e-commerce sessions starting with a Google search, and this is a Statista statistic, doesn't that make it a really good source for decision making? Okay, yes, we have a lot of data, but don't SEOs themselves have a lot of search data, right? And this is something that we're going to start to look at. Now, here at Searchmetrics, we've taken this and created something around it and leveraged our data, obviously years of it, to create what we call Searchmetrics Insights. But really, it's just search insights, right? And this is one for all of you SEOs out there that I really want you to start thinking about and start conversing about, which is what people think search data is, right? People think that search data is just keywords, rankings, search volumes, then you've got product data and category data. Right. In my opinion, search data is actually a lot more. Search data is an unbiased indicator on what's actually occurring in the market. Right. If we start to look at some of these things, there's so much out there. Right. Imagine being able to have clear visibility on what consumers are searching for. And from this data, being able to understand how to position your company. Now, year on year, people are looking at search engines to answer critical questions to their buyer journey. Right. You look at stuff, you're trying to buy it, you're trying to find out if it's good. You look at reviews, you find questions that are being asked to Google. Like Judith was saying, even in our presentation before, how many calories are in a glass of wine and all these things. And on Google, there's no filter on what people are actually searching. Right, we're all super truthful when it comes to Google search. I think I always say to people, I'll find out more from your Google search history than even knowing you for a little bit, because it's truly unbiased. And what these do is they provide you guys super influential teaching moments. It provides insights into your persona's buying journey. And actually what you can do with this is start understanding more about the market, not just SEO. Now, if we start to look at search volume, for example, right, search volume is one of the most well-known indicators that are out there in SEO. However, where we can talk about search volume collectively is TAM. So search volume, TAM, total addressable market, right? It's a foundational metric in SEO, but when we take it out of SEO, what it starts to tell us is how big is our market? What's the market size? What's the total addressable market for X, Y, Z product categories, right? So simply put, it's how many consumers are searching for something within a product category. Now, we know this as SEOs, right? But actually, we don't think of it in this exact way. We think of it as, well, should we target this, and should we grow it, and should we make it rise? Whereas this is about, when you're looking at it at a higher level, that's about analyzing the viability and the potential to actually capitalize on a particular industry. So in short, search volume equals the total addressable market, but the total addressable market also leads to the consumer demand. Right? So if you understand the size of the market, you now know how big it is. But from there, we can also understand the consumer demand, right? So when we start to look at this, we know that change is constant, right? We know that the market landscape always moves, and actually creators push the market to keep moving. And actually, as people keep moving, search volume becomes even more important, because actually we can analyze how fast the market is growing or moving, and we can understand if we're growing faster or slower than the competition. But when we look at the competition, we also want to understand, the landscape in itself. So from the viewpoint of SEO, we know we look at competition as organic search. How are we competing against this brand? Do they have more visibility than us? How are we doing in this side? Do they have more market share than us? And that's great when we're looking at SEO. But if we want to take it out of the SEO box, we can start looking at competitors as how to go to market, right? When you are approaching an industry that has one major player versus a market that has lots of players, you're going to start to look at it a little bit different, right? When you look at competition, you can also understand how they're growing. Are they serving their customer in a way that we're not? Or which stages of the buyer journey are they doing this in, right? You can even look at competitive landscape as a B2B vendor and understand who you could partner with, who you can distribute through. So when you combine this with lots of other points in a buyer's journey, we can see who owns the market, we can see how to navigate it, we can see who to partner with, we can actually understand how to capture that market at every stage of the funnel and start to nurture those customers to really do things. Now, if we go back a step, we said search volume represents an unbiased view into what consumers are searching for. And it's well known that companies and platforms are collecting data on their customers to understand the behavior, to nurture their experience within that page. But that's what's happening within the company's sandbox, right? It's happening on their website, it's happening on their platform, it's happening on their social pages. And, we're trying to optimize what's coming through the door. So in this case, in the sandbox, right? But this really represents companies collecting data on their consumers in an environment they actually control, right? But what about understanding your customers outside of the controlled environment, right? And now if you think about that, that's mission critical data. That's a different way to analyze your competition. Analyzing your competition through an organic lens lets you peer in how you stack up to the competition and environment they don't control. And this is super, super important because it's not manipulated. So here's an example, right? Let's say you own a coffee shop. Everyone that walks into this coffee shop presents behaviors that you track. And this data allows you to kind of construct an environment that really enhances customers' experiences to drive sales, right? And these are real things that coffee shops did, right? They put bigger tables to sit and work at because they realized people want to work. They had discounts for loyal customers. They added Wi-Fi access. They realized customers were more ethical. They wanted to have fair trade coffees. They realized some customers like decaf coffees. If customers are staying there for a long time, they realized they should add hot food and cold lunch. They realized bottomless coffee is a good idea. Even some places have put quieter music in stores to help people that are working. All this information they managed to gather from inside their controlled environment. But what about the customers in this case, let's say, that didn't even step foot into the coffee shop? What are the search behaviors of those potential customers? What were they looking for? How many searches are they making? What can we understand about these customers? And actually, these are the things we can begin to answer with search data. Because search data allows us to analyze what potential search volume is there for a topic or a cluster, what's the behavior of the customer. When we start to look at traffic potential for keywords and topics, we can start to figure out how much traffic there is and the potential for traffic. And actually, we can start to understand whether the customer's searching for your products, whether we can target them in the same way by generating content around the things they're searching, and actually starting to look at targeting them throughout their buyer journey. I always say that your content is your salesperson, right? If you are buying in a store, you ask lots of questions to the salespeople, and actually, when you're in a buying journey, you still have those questions. You just look to the websites that you're searching on to find them. And if you don't find the information to the questions you're going to ask, you're going to potentially go somewhere else and find them. And then if that website is good, they're going to take your user. So as a result, the rankings start to happen in the right way, right? People start to generate authority around keywords or topics, answer questions for their buyers. And actually, when you look at the share of voice, these are the competitors that you're looking at, and you're looking at from an unbiased view, right? Organic search is the top channel for customer acquisition. So it's the most accurate indicator of actually who is your competitor. I'm sure loads of people, when they're looking at industries or SEOs within in-house companies, will start to look and think, okay, well, these are, I've said these are our customers, these are our competitors, and they may find that actually, when they talk to their clients, they think they compete against someone else on the high street. But online, you see who you really compete against, right? When we look at share of voice, again, an SEO metric, something we all know, but actually when we're talking to a wider business, share of voice is who is in front of your customers, right? In a large part, share of voice represents your organization's authority around a category of products or services. Every brand wants to dominate their marketplace. And similar to kind of have the most up-to-date relevant data on consumer demand, it's equally important that a company consistently monitors and understands the authority they have around the categories of products or services that they provide in both local markets and national markets. And if you can actually truly understand where your strengths are and who actually is in front of your customers, then you can start to figure out exactly how you place yourself within that market. Another metric that SEOs use is search intent. Right, we all look at search intent. What's the intention of our customer? Is it transactional? Is it informational? Is it navigational? But actually, search intent tells us what type of content a company's target consumer is kind of really reading, right? If we know that for a particular topic or particular cluster of things that we're selling, customers need more information, people need more informational content, we can, as SEOs, can direct our companies to create that content, right? So they want to, most organizations want to solve the question, which is how best to reach those target consumers. Now, in this world, there's loads of ways in which customers can find what they want. But the data shows that organic search still is the best way. So if we understand what their intention is, we can understand what to actually look at, right? If we understood that the search intent, if we look at the coffee shop example, if the owner, we wanted to understand our customers, we could find their preferred coffee vendor was reading these blogs, or they were looking at coffee shops in this area, or they were trying to find their coffee shops by looking at different prices and these different things. If we understood that information about our customers, we could then create, partnerships with those blogs. We could put ourselves in those places to make sure we understand exactly what to do with that information. So like I said, that's beyond how to rank for it. It's about, as an organization, trying to understand tactical strategy. So if we understand these consumers, we can actually understand how to strategize. We can understand how to divide our organization to make sure we're targeting those people. And actually, we can start to look at who has a share of voice around a product, or who has the right content around a particular niche, and then start building around that as an industry and as an organization to really leverage that data, right? There's another side of thing, which is the seasonality and trends, right? We as SEOs always look at seasonality as trends just as what they are, but really what they help us understand is, when should a product go on sale? How much inventory do we need? Again, when we tack that on with search volume, we know the inventory is going to spike. When should we market it? When should we increase production? All of these things are constantly being asked by a company, and actually we have all of the answers because we know how much people are searching for it, we know when people want it, we know when people want to buy it, we know how much it's spiking by or shrinking by, and those are the things as SEOs we can start to help our businesses do. There's loads of companies that provide this data, lots of market research companies, but market research is tedious, it's expensive, it takes long to do. Sometimes it's got small sample sizes. Sometimes it's biased because of the questions we ask. Whereas actually search data, when we're looking at it, and obviously like us, we're looking at almost the 3.5 billion searches that Google processes daily, right? With this information, we can create all of the insight that people need, right? We can start to understand how demands look for different subsections. We can understand when they're starting to grow. And this is just an example snippet of some of the stuff we do. But actually, when we want to look into the data, I'll start to show you how it looks, right? We can use search data to make data-driven decisions, right? And I've seen this floating around on LinkedIn all over the place. I don't know who originally made it, so if anyone knows, please do let me know so we can credit them afterwards. But effectively, this data here that we're seeing is kind of the SEO data we have, right? When we sort it, this is kind of where we get to. But actually, if we as SEOs can start to move our data down a funnel and start to arrange it, present it, and explain it to the wider business, that's when we can start to make a difference. And I'll give you an example. This is just data that we've sourced for a particular industry around, in this case, it's going to be building supplies. And I'll start to show you how, again, just search data, but how we can use it in a better and more efficient way, right? So if we start to look at this, this is building supplies, right? All we did was took a really large data set of keywords, and we looked at building suppliers, and we looked at the top 10 competitors. If we look at the US here, what we can see is that how the market is structured. So in this case, you can see Home Depot owns a really large proportion of the market, is taking a lot of traffic. The rest of the players in that market are a little bit smaller, and you can see how the market's set. So in this case, actually, when we're looking at it, this market means that they've got one massive player, and the way we need to now target and address this market is going to be very, very different. If we start to look at it in the UK, it's completely different. Here, if you look at it, it's a much more even market, right? Wix, B&Q, DIY.com, they're closely fighting for that top spot. Screwfix and Amazon are kind of in there, right? So it makes a big difference how, if we were going into this market, we'd approach it really, really differently. In the same way, Amazon is actually quite an interesting one. If we go back here and quickly look at it, Amazon is actually even interesting because Amazon it's one of the areas in which they don't actually do the best. Normally, we know Amazon does really, really well when they start smashing it. But in this case, they're not even doing as well as the rest of the market. So this is another way in which we can start to take this information and really start playing it around. If we start to look at another scenario, and this is another industry, we looked at the fireplace industry, we can see that across different segments, we can start to see how it looks for the last few years. Right, we can start to understand how the growth is. What we can start to see is that there's different things that cause a spike. Right, obviously in the winter, we can see that people are cold. So obviously the demand for fireplaces goes up. In the US, however, there's Thanksgiving. And in Thanksgiving, there's lots of decoration around a particular industry. There's lots of decoration around your fireplace, lots of stuff you put up. So actually in the US, you can see the spikes are much higher, much faster. The angle of them happens quicker because a lot more demand happening quickly. So if you were a European vendor and you decided to go into the US without truly understanding this data, you would be stocking it not as efficiently. You would be not marketing it as efficiently. You wouldn't be going into that market. You might, copy and paste your strategy, and it doesn't work in that way. So actually, when we start to look at our search data, this is the kind of insight we can share. Obviously, we need to have a large data set to do it, but these are the type of things we can start to tell our businesses and tell our companies just by using search volume data, traffic data, search intent data, demand data, and pooling it all together in the right way. Right. In fact, if we zoom out from this month-on-month view, we can actually start to see how the growth is looking for a particular sector. So if we look at this, you can see that actually in the US, the demand is massive. It's now overtaken what was there in Germany, and actually you can see it's growing at a faster rate. Now, again, if I go back to you being that vendor in Europe and you try to go into the US knowing that there was demand, and you weren't looking at that level on a category like data, you wouldn't understand why that demand is there. However, when you start to look at the search volumes for different things, you can see that in Germany, they're selling a lot more fireplace ovens. In the US, that demand is barely there. I mean, barely relatively, but it's not there, right? They care more about electrical fireplaces. So again, just using the search data allows us to truly understand where we should be putting our efforts, where we should merchandise, how we should market, how we can approach a market. And then obviously we still do the standard SEO things that we as marketers do, but this is giving us more insight and information to how we can, like I say, it's not just search metrics. It's really data from search, not just search data, right? We can even look at, like I said, the intention. So I'll go in, start looking at intention. If you start to look at the electrical market we analyze, we could see that actually when we're looking at kind of cable ties, for example, right? Cable ties have very little informational intention, right? People want cable ties, they click it, they buy it, it's done. Whereas when people are looking at transformers, for example, there's lots of questions around what transformer do I need? How do I use it? What way to go? And again, if you are a company that doesn't understand that, you're not going to be building the right content to make it happen. You're not going to be building the relevant insight into that market to make it happen. And actually, you're not going to be able to leverage the data in the right way. So these are some of the small examples that we can do and we can show you, and actually some of the ways in which we can actually leverage the data in the right way. Now, as I said, that's pretty much what I wanted to go in and communicate and what I want SEOs to truly understand. And really, like I say, start thinking more about the fact that we are the gatekeepers to this information, and we're more than just website fixes. We have access to so much information about consumers that perhaps we're not using as well as we could. We're using it to kind of build content. We're using it to do SEO better. But actually, I personally believe that having access to such amazing insight around our consumers allows us to start talking, and we should be talking to many more people in an organization and in our industries to actually start delivering even more value from insight that we can provide to our businesses. And if you want to talk about it, by all means, please do reach out. Obviously, here at Searchmetrics, we've got a really a large comprehensive data set that allows us to do this. But again, I believe you can all do this with platforms and tools and data that you all have as well. But if you want to talk about it, by all means, reach out on Twitter or reach out to me directly, and we can more than happy to have conversations about it. But really, all I hope is that it sparks an idea for you all to start thinking about this internally and start thinking about what you can do with your data that you have and what decisions you can make and how you can share your data with the relevant people, whether it's the marketing department, whether it's the purchasing department, whether it's the partnerships department, and even more. So I hope this gives some food for thought. That's about it from me. And I think the information and the content was so hot that it's now sparked the fire alarm in our building.
I hope it's not something serious there.
No, it's
Okay.
like I say, that's pretty much it. I think it's too hot to handle, right?
So our VP of operations, Ozan, also in London and works in our WeWork office. And it's always just when we are in a meeting, we always just hearing the alarms very much. So I know it's not something serious, but so.
yeah, no, they like to make sure we're safe, right?
Yeah. So thank you so much for your amazing speech. They're very interesting insights, and especially I saw some of last slides you mentioned about search intent. So I think every day also the end user are just know how to search, how to get the exactly right results. So it's very nice that you mentioned about it. Actually, we have a question for you, and if anyone wants to ask questions, we still have 5 minutes, so please just type your questions. From Sultan, she said that thank you for your amazing speech. You think to change your SEO visibility calculation metrics in the near future? Is there something in your list?
Yeah, I mean, we're always trying to make things more interesting and start to make things better. And actually, it's a poignant time. I might even just quickly share a screen and start to show some interesting things quickly. Hopefully, you can see Google on my screen, which is a page that we're already always on. But some of the metrics that we actually use on, and some of the cool things that we're doing. And actually, I got asked recently about how we start to look at intent. Right. And what we do is we start to look at pages and start to see, first off, I'll give you a little snippet, right? If you're looking at Halloween's obviously coming up. So start going in here and say, Halloween costume ideas. Ooh, my spelling is always terrible. Sorry, apologies. Costume ideas, right? When we start to look at this, we can see that the user intention in this case, for example, is ideas. They want imagery, they want content, they want to understand things. They're not looking to buy and convert. If you look at some of the signals that Google shows you, obviously, first off, you can see there's a lot more blogs. You can see all the content that's on it. It's all long form. It's going to be imagery. Also, if you look here, this is a really cool thing that I like to look at. Google also tries to prioritize, because Google's job isn't really to serve content. Google's job is to serve us, right? Google's job isn't to send traffic around. In fact, Google's probably doing less and less traffic sharing, more and more traffic stealing nowadays, right? Or holding. But in this case, you can see that Google's even sharing, actually it's all images, then shopping, right? Because Google knows you care about imagery first. Google knows you care about more long form content. Now I'll change the search, right? If I change it to just Halloween costumes, right? My intention has changed, right? I now am not looking for ideas. I'm looking for costumes. Now just look at the way it's changed it. All shopping, imagery, right? Google has changed the way it's surfacing the information. And starting, if you go this way, Google is also actually, showing us now more shops, more stores, more costumes, less ideas, more costumes. So these are some of the metrics we actually use already. Start plugging in. We research the pages and start to see if there's more shopping carts. We look at it to see if it's more long form. There's some of the ways that you can also do it. We are also looking into some more insights into our forecasting data and some of the things we're providing on that front to also start pushing some more into there. But actually, we're adding and constantly trying to evolve and incorporate different additions into what we consider our visibility. But actually, like I say, these are things that you can always look at, even on the surface level, if you are using it on yourselves and trying to find and source this information. Google does share all the information. It's really there. You just have to try and see what you want to look at, basically. So I hope that helps and hope that gives some more insight.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for your example as well. And another question is, are you going to do anything about SEO forecasting in Searchmetrics? Do you have
Yes,
any?
we are. We're actually working on something right now, and we're going to be putting it into a testing phase for all of the people that want to start playing around with it soon enough. So if you do want to have a play with some of these cool things, we've got a little playground that we're building, so that all the new things that we start to test and build, we can put into the market, and actually people like you and people that know kind of SEO and want to play around with things before they get released, so everybody can have a look. So if you do want to, if you are interested in and want to be involved, then please just reach out directly to me. You've got my Twitter handle. Just send me a message, and I will get you some access, so we can have you playing around with everything.
Yeah, great to hear that. Maybe we can be one of the testers, I guess.
I'm sure you will be, Mehmet.
Thanks so much. So we don't have any new questions, and our time is nearly up. So
Perfect.
I
I
don't want
realize
to
I am
spend
just before the break, so I'm sure everyone needs a little bit of a rest and a break. But by all means, if anyone needs anything, please, by all means, do reach out. It's like I say, it's an amazing lineup with some amazing speakers. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us. So hope to see you soon again in person.
Cheers. Likewise. Thank you. Thank you.